Welcome to the Roving Nature Podcast, where we'll explore all things nature and conservation in the great state of North Carolina and beyond. I'm your host, Matt Bryant, and I invite you to join me as we hear from guests who are passionate about nature and who have made it a significant part of their work, creativity, or personal lives. And I encourage you to learn along with me as we celebrate our deep bond and relationship to our natural world.
On this beautiful day outside.
Today we're speaking with Emily Sutton, riverkeeper and the new executive director for the Haw River Assembly, which is located in Chatham County, North Carolina. She has been Haw Riverkeeper since 2018, leading the fight against pollution in the river, which includes dangerous contaminants, excessive accumulation of nutrients in Jordan Lake, and sediment pollution. We'll hear more about what all that is and what it means soon enough. She grew up paddling rivers in the Midwest and moved to North Carolina to receive her degree in sustainability development at Appalachian State University, where she studied agroecology, watershed ecology, and outdoor education. Emily currently lives in Durham, North Carolina. What's the Haw River Assembly, you ask? It's a nonprofit citizens group founded in 1982 to restore and protect the Haw River and Jordan Lake, and was conceived of to build a watershed community that encourages awareness, education, and action. The Assembly's goals are to promote environmental education, conservation, and pollution prevention, to speak as a unified voice for the river in the public arena, and to put into people's hands the tools and the knowledge they need to be effective guardians of the river. Now a little bit about the river itself. The Haw River flows 110 miles from its origin headwaters in the north-central Piedmont region of North Carolina, near Greensboro, which is where I'm located, to the Cape Fear River, and eventually meets the Atlantic Ocean near Wilmington on the coast. The river and its watershed provide drinking water to nearly 1 million people, and the 1,700 square mile watershed is home to a variety of fish and wildlife, including but not limited to blue heron, bald eagle, beaver, deer, otter, largemouth and smallmouth bass, bowfin, crappie, carp, and bluegill. The Haw also contains important habitat for the endangered Cape Fear shiner and an assortment of rare freshwater mussel species. And beyond all that, it's just an absolutely beautiful river. Welcome, everybody. I'm on the Haw River here in the central part of North Carolina, and I'm joined with today's guest, Miss Emily Sutton, who is the new executive director of the Haw River Assembly and the Haw River Keeper. It was a beautiful fall evening, and the water riffled around the nearby rocks as we sat on a large boulder outcropping in the river to talk. I asked Emily to tell us why this location and this particular spot was so special to her.
Well, it's beautiful for one, but my emotional connection to this space is even a little bit deeper. So I grew up on rivers. I've always really connected to my sense of place around rivers. I grew up paddling in the Ozarks with my family, and so that's how we spent time together. That's like our quality family time still today. The way that I spend time with my friends and my family and the people that I love is very river-centric. And so I found that community when I lived in Boone, going to Appalachian State. And then when I moved here to Durham, to the Pittsboro area, I didn't have that community. I was new here. And so the first thing I did was find my river. And this is where I landed, this specific spot on the Haw. So I would be so stressed out with my new first out of college job and overworked and underpaid, and I would come here to the river, and sometimes I would just like play and laugh and holler and be loud with my friends, and sometimes I would just lay on the rocks and nap, and it was just such a calming, grounding space for me. And then being here on the river all the time, I heard about this organization called Haw River Assembly, and I did some research and applied for a job with them. Funnily enough, did not get that job, but the executive director, Elaine Chioso, she reached out to me and was like, hey, we're going to create this other position for you. I think you'd be really great for it. And so in 2016, I was hired on very part-time to manage all of our volunteer programs. And then both of us quickly realized that I was a policy wonk at heart and I wanted more. And so I took on more hours and became full-time, and we divvied up at the time she was the executive director and river keeper. I became the river keeper, and she stayed executive director until earlier this month.
Well, congratulations, by the way. If I had that correct, you will now be the new executive director, correct?
That's right.
Wow,
so we've re-merged those job titles to be executive director and river keeper. But fortunately, we have an amazing staff, the biggest staff that we've ever had. And so I can delegate a lot of the sampling work and a lot of the other tasks. So we all have a manageable workload. We've got an amazing team right now of really passionate and ambitious people.
You might be wondering, what is a river keeper? I asked Emily to tell us about that. What is a river keeper and what do they do?
A river keeper, it's easy to explain to a kid. Like, you keep the river, you take care of it. And, in practice, that means a lot of different things. We wear a lot of hats. So the short version is that any issue in water quality in the entire watershed, it's an 8-county area, that's what I work on. So what that actually means in practice is that I am working with impacted communities. I'm researching what does an asphalt do to water quality? What are health impacts of PFAS? Like, I'm not a chemist. I'm not a scientist by trade, but I have to become an expert on all of these issues as they arise, so then I can help the communities who are impacted, or I can provide a comment letter to the agency that they should include a specific piece of information in a permit that they may have overlooked. And so it's different every day, and we do fundraisers, we do school programs. We're a nonprofit, and so we're raising money. We never take money from any organizations or companies or corporations that would try to influence our actions. So we're very transparent about who we take money from, and we try to not only protect the river from water quality issues or pollution, but show people why they should love it too. So we're bringing people out for hikes, we're bringing people out for paddles. We do education programs for children and adults. And we're really wanting to get people engaged in this place that we love, so they want to protect it too.
Thank you for doing this work, by the way. I'm really grateful that there is somebody keeping this place and keeping an eye on it, especially now with all the crazy amount of development and stuff going into the water all the time. What would you say from your background is helping you do this job? Like maybe on a personal level or on like a professional level, or are there things that have come in handy for you as a water keeper?
Yeah. So many things. Well, I think one thing that's really interesting is, so in North Carolina, for example, we have more river keepers than any other state. We've got a network of 15 river keepers just in North Carolina. And we work very closely together. Some of them are my very best friends. But we all come at this from a very different background. I was in environmental education and agriculture, and I was a river rat, and I came from the Midwest, and I love community organizing. Some of the other river keepers were in the military or have a law degree or environmental management. So very different backgrounds. So it gives us all this different perspective so we can lean on each other. Being from the Midwest, I am really good at talking to people who are not necessarily politically aligned with a traditional environmentalist agenda. So we can talk about really important policies in a way that isn't just like Democrat versus Republican, because water is bipartisan and we all have a right to clean, fishable, drinkable, swimmable water. It's become very political, unfortunately, and I'm also a registered lobbyist, and so I do a lot of work in the legislative building, but we continue to try to fight that narrative because chemical company lobbyists and the lobbyists for the Farm Bureau and Port Council and Home Builders Association, they're able to spend a lot more money and have a lot more influence than we are. But we show up, we're still there, and we bring constituents, and we make sure that the legislators that are in the building know exactly what implications the decision they make will have on the people they represent.
You'd mentioned working with waterkeepers from around the state. Is that also part of a larger network as well? Do you have connections even beyond North Carolina doing the same thing?
Yeah, so Waterkeeper Alliance is an international network. Waterkeeper Alliance on its own is a nonprofit, and they're based out of New York, but they're international. And so there are waterkeepers all over the globe. We work very closely, especially with the North Carolina folks, just because we have the same laws that we're usually fighting against, sometimes supporting. But we work really closely with all the river keepers in the Gulf South Atlantic region because we have a lot of the same issues. One example is when we first started fighting, there's a proposed pipeline project called the Mountain Valley Pipeline Project, Southgate Extension. Initially, that proposal was going to go through Rockingham County and Alamance County and end at a terminus right along the Haw River in Graham. But that proposal has now changed, but when we first started that fight, I didn't know the first thing about fracked gas. I met one of my very dear friends at Sierra Club who worked in fracked gas, and she taught me everything I needed to know, but I was the community organizer in that role. These were rural communities. I came from a rural community, so that background of working with very rural, conservative people that want to fish, people that want their kids to play with crayfish in the creek in the backyard, those are my people. So we could organize those folks, and we had standing room only at every town hall, county commissioners meeting along the proposed route to oppose this project. That step-by-step information of like, this is what you need to do, here's the steps, here is what to expect. I got a lot of that advice from other river keepers that had fought very similar fights. Riverkeeper in Savannah, on the Savannah River in Georgia, some of the folks in Jordan Cove in Alaska, they helped tremendously just to tell me what to expect and what are the processes. And so we definitely lean hard on each other. I mean, right now we're working on hurricane relief stuff. So we're going up on Monday, a bunch of North Carolina river keepers to help the mountain river keepers with whatever they need. We're ready to help the folks in Florida after Milton passes through. So we all support each other in that way and have formed a really tight family unit in some ways with a lot of the river keepers.
Are there others, folks other than river keepers, that you regularly team up with or collaborate with, either locally or in the state?
Yeah, North Carolina, I mean, I feel a little biased because I've lived here for a long time and I love where I live, but we have such an amazing team of advocates in this state. Whether it's from Southern Environmental Law Center or North Carolina Conservation Network or countless other riverkeeper and environmental groups, we lean hard on each other, and we're all very passionate and driven and going the extra mile to make sure that we're fighting for what we believe is right. And so sometimes that means that we're commiserating and we're licking our wounds after a brutal loss at the General Assembly, but a lot of the times it's leaning on the very diverse skill sets and backgrounds that all of us bring to the table.
If I have this right in terms of trying to situate where I am, I'm on the Haw River, I'm in the Haw River watershed, and I'm in the Cape Fear River Basin. Is that correct in terms of the geography of where we are?
That's exactly right.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
And then that fits in like a puzzle with all the other river basins around it. Am I understanding correctly? That's the idea?
Yeah, every square inch of land is in a watershed. And so they do, fit together like a puzzle in that way, but they don't follow county lines or state lines or any other lines that we have invented and made up. So to think in a watershed scale is, I think, a very focused way to think about connectivity and problems upstream and how do we protect communities downstream. Because there's an upstream and downstream to every pollution source, every drinking water source. And so to have that sort of whole systems approach is, I think, a better way of thinking about it. But we're one half of the Upper Cape Fear. So downstream from us is Jordan Lake. And Jordan Lake, after the dam from Jordan Lake, it's about 100 yards more of the Haw River, and then the Deep River comes in to join it. And it's at this point called Mermaid Point. And it's called Mermaid Point. It's a fun little story. Folklore is that mermaids would swim up from the ocean all the way up the Cape Fear, and they would come to the point of the Deep and the Haw, and that's where they would dry their hair, on Mermaid Point. I love imagining that and telling all sorts of people that. I think it's a really fun little story. But downstream from that point, it becomes the Cape Fear.
One of the motivations of this podcast is to find connections between people, places, histories, and of course, our natural surroundings. One way in which all of this is connected and interwoven is through our local watersheds. They are like the framework or network that brings it and us all together. It's where all the water goes when it runs off our yards and parking lots and roads, but it also forms the lakes where we take the water back to support life. When Emily spoke earlier about a whole systems approach to thinking about and managing the river, that's what she was referring to. How every creek and tributary is connected to another water source downstream. What we do at one place has an impact on those downstream, which is why it's so important to monitor things like pollution and sediment runoff. As the writer, environmentalist, and farmer Wendell Berry said, "Do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you." I asked Emily to talk more about that whole systems way of approaching her work.
At the bottom of our watershed is Jordan Lake, which is a water supply. And so Jordan Lake is filled with all of the nutrient runoff, all the sediment pollution, all of the PFAS, 1,4-dioxane, industrial toxins, wastewater treatment plant effluent, all of that is at the bottom of our watershed, which is a huge water supply for a big chunk of Wake County and Chatham County.
So the things you're mentioning that are in the water, is it a combination of stuff that originates with us as individuals, like in our neighborhood, or is it more kind of like at businesses and sort of industrial level, or maybe a combination of the two?
It is a combination of the two, but I caution away from blaming the consumer. Not that we don't have contributions, for sure, but let's just talk about sediment, for example. If you live in a rural community, you've probably got a gravel driveway, and every time it rains, you've got a washout of gravel and there's a river of orange clay that runs down your driveway and goes into a storm drain and goes into a creek. That's sediment pollution. Creeks are generally bright orange around here after a big rain. But there are rules in place to prevent sediment pollution, and a lot of the times those rules aren't being followed. Now, the driveway example, that's not necessarily a sediment violation. That's just what happens in a rain event. But it does contribute to that problem. And sediment, when it gets into a stream, it's not just an eyesore. It just swallows up that essential habitat on the bottom of a creek for sensitive macroinvertebrates, which are the basis of a healthy ecosystem for a watershed community. So yes, that's a small contributor that is based on an individual level. But when you look at big developments that are, Chatham Park, for example, is one of the biggest developments that we've seen in this area, and it's coming right along the Haw. And it will be about, I think the total is around 7,000 acres by the end of it. So they're clear-cutting a lot of forest, and there's going to be a lot of sediment pollution. We've already seen with the early phases of this development, there's a lot of sediment pollution. So your little driveway runoff, yeah, it's contributing a little bit, but when we're looking at dump trucks loads of sediment coming off of huge swaths of just clear-cut land going into a creek, that's a drop in the bucket.
And I suspect that this is a similar situation with things like algal blooms and lakes and things like that as well, right? When we see the kind of bright green, soupy water.
Yeah, nutrient pollution is tricky because it accumulates. By the time that it gets to Jordan Lake, we've got major wastewater treatment plants that are discharging huge amounts of nutrients. And those nutrients are regulated by their permits. But if Reedsville and Greensboro and Burlington and Graham and all of these towns along the way are discharging high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus into a stream, well, that builds up and that accumulates. And then you've got your non-point pollution coming from just rainwater and stormwater coming from golf courses and pesticides and fertilizers and all of these other sources of just general runoff that you can't pinpoint to a specific source. And so that builds up.
One of the things we hear a lot of in the news these days is about the presence of forever chemicals. But what are they exactly? And why should we be worried about them showing up in our water? Like in the Haw River, for example. Well, this is something that river keepers worry about and have to deal with. Emily tells us more.
I unfortunately spend a lot of my time working on PFAS and 1,4-dioxane because the Haw has been heavily impacted by these toxic chemicals. They're called forever chemicals because they never break down. PFAS, or perfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, and that's the acronym for the entire group of compounds. That group of compounds is designed to not break down. It has one of the strongest carbon bonds. So it's meant for waterproof, fire resistant, stain resistant, all of those non-stick things. And it's really good at its job of never breaking down. It's not removed in traditional drinking water treatment or wastewater treatment. So a lot of people, when I explain this issue, they're like, well, why were these companies allowed to discharge this chemical in the first place? And the problem is, amongst others, is that there's not a numeric standard or a permit limit on this contaminant set by the federal government or the state government yet. Now, the Clean Water Act states that any discharge that you put from your discharge point, whether it's an individual factory, facility, or a wastewater treatment plant, has to be documented in a permit. It has to be disclosed. If it's not disclosed, they don't know what to look for. They don't know what to sample for. And that wasn't happening. No one was disclosing this chemical. And so for decades, this toxin was just released into streams and rivers and air all across our world, really, and it was undocumented. And so now we're realizing just how pervasive and abundant this toxin is in the Haw River watershed.
This is something that you and the team, you're able to go out and test for it with specialized equipment or
Yeah, we don't
technique,
process the samples.
Okay.
We collect the samples and we send them to a lab. So We're really fortunate to have amazing partnerships with researchers at universities, and so we would not be able to afford sampling on our own. But we work with Dr. Detlef Knappy's lab at NC State, and they process our samples for us, or at the local EPA regional office process samples for us as well. So I spend a lot of time looking at maps, and I'm looking at where the wastewater treatment plant outfall is in a river or a stream. And then I'm looking at who are the industrial users within that wastewater treatment plant who are sending their waste there. And so then I can say, okay, this one, and this one are likely to have PFAS. So I'm going to sample upstream and downstream of that wastewater treatment plant to see what's coming into the river. And then I'm also looking at sludge. So sludge is land-applied biosolids, which is the solids that are coming from the wastewater treatment plant. They get land applied to farm fields generally. They're growing hay on it. Well, if that wastewater treatment plant was full of PFAS, so is the sludge. And so we're monitoring the streams next to those sludge fields, but we're also monitoring the wells that could be impacted from the groundwater contamination by those fields. And that has been really alarming to see high levels of PFAS contamination in private drinking wells because there's not regulation or protections really in our state for those people.
So it sounds like a lot of detective work out in the field and researching and using a variety of tools. How does all this connect back to the legislative activism? How do you end up on the policy floor or standing in front of legislators, making your case or being present?
So if we can show that the people who they represent are impacted by this cancer-causing toxin, then we need to be pushing for regulation in our state to, one, give funding to the enforcement agency, DEQ, to actually be able to do their job and set permit limits and enforce those limits, but also to make it a policy that these industries aren't allowed to discharge this in the first place. And if they do, the polluter is responsible. Right now, the EPA has set maximum contaminant levels, which are drinking water standards. So if you are a resident of the town of Pittsboro and you get your drinking water from the town of Pittsboro, the town of Pittsboro has to meet these new MCLs, or those maximum contaminant limits that are set by the EPA. Well, that's great news for you. You have protected water because your drinking water has to meet these limits set by the EPA. But if Pittsboro is pulling their drinking water out of the Haw and all of those upstream dischargers don't have a standard yet, that means that the Pittsboro drinking water treatment plant is paying to clean up those upstream polluters' discharge. And those upstream polluters are not being held responsible at all. That's a policy that we need in place.
We're of course focusing here in this episode on Emily and her role as the Haw Riverkeeper. But as she notes throughout this episode, the work that she does is part of a large network of people and organizations throughout the state who often work together and share information and resources to accomplish things together that would be really difficult or impossible to do alone.
We are the only river advocacy group that is solely focused on the Haw. But we do not work alone. I mean, we lean heavily on Southern Environmental Law Center takes all of our legal cases. I'm not a lawyer. I provide the sample information and the impacted communities, and I'm out there doing a lot of the community organizing and the advocacy work. But I'm not a lawyer. And so they're taking all of our legal cases for us. I lean very heavily on our friends at Conservation Network to help me with policy stuff and doing outreach and doing some of the legislative asks that we need. There's a lot of people in North Carolina really focused on PFAS work generally. So that means that they're also helping me on the Haw.
All this talk of PFAS and whole systems approaches and legislative wrangling needed a bit of comedy relief, which we occasionally got from Emily's dog Ola. At one point, she jumped up on the big rock where Emily and I sat and leaned into my back while I was asking Emily questions. It's little moments like that that remind us to always take a breath, be in the moment, and never let go of your sense of humor and making time for a good laugh.
Oh, hey. Ola is sitting next to me, waiting for her questions.
You've been very patient
Very
with my
patient.
wet dog.
Very, very patient. It's actually great. The whole time we've been sitting here, Ola is very busy exploring on the rocks and in the water. It's a lot of fun to watch, actually. I wish I was that agile. I can't move around like that anymore. I want to come back to something you've touched on a few times, is this idea of connecting with the community engagement and getting them involved. And I see a lot of things on your website. There's a lot of mechanisms and programs in place for that to happen. And so, for example, one that you mentioned when we were on our way out to the river was the Haw River Learning Celebration, which just took place. So I was wondering, maybe using that as an example, or any of the other programs that might come to mind, if you could talk about that as a platform or a vehicle with connecting with people in the community.
Our learning celebration is really magical. I mean, I can't even talk about it without just gushing about how much we love this program. We've done it for a little over 40 years. And so I run into people in my advocacy work and they're like, oh my gosh, you work at Haw River Assembly. I went on a field trip with you when I was in 4th grade. I do not remember any field trips in my entire elementary school with that much specific detail. but it really leaves a lasting impression on people. And not just the kids. I mean, we have volunteers that have been there, have brought their families there. We have a bigger staff than we used to, but we're a small team. And we've got over 100 kids in the woods most days, going from station to station to station, learning about the river and how to know if the river is healthy, or learning about the Sissipaha, who are the people who are native to this river, and playing with clay and doing nature art and doing just river play exploration. And a lot of these kids come from backgrounds that they don't have access to places like that. They don't go out on the river and go fishing or paddling or playing in the water like I was fortunate enough to grow up doing. And we prioritize Title I schools, and we have often covered the transportation fees when buses can't afford to bring their kids there. I mean, we pull out all the stops to make it affordable, to make sure that the kids are getting outside, getting to our program, and we can run an amazing program for these kids that they don't have the ability to have experiences like this in another way. That means that we run this program at a loss. This is not a money-making venture for us. We have a big crowdfunder that we do every year for it. And I'm always so impressed by the way that our community and our members and our supporters really show up and support our crowdfunder and make it happen. For us as staff, it's 3 weeks, but it's a different group of kids every day. So it's the same program 3 weeks every day, and we've got volunteers that show up every day for 3 weeks, and they camp and they stay there with us, and we provide dinner, and we have a talent show on Thursday, and it's kind of become this family reunion for us every year, where there are people that I don't see throughout the year until the learning celebration, and then I see them for 3 weeks, and it's so fun, and I love it. Get involved. We need volunteers, but also it's just so much fun to see these kids just light up and ask the most poignant, thoughtful questions. Fourth grade is a fun age, and so you can really start to see who these kids are and how their personalities are growing and changing. I had a kid last week who was so scientific. He had his hands up and he was like, "This is my hypothesis about this specific insect that we have found." And he's just so scientific and thoughtful and brilliant. And I love seeing that unfiltered joy in the kid every day. It's incredible.
I love that, and it's great seeing you light up telling that story, and that has got to be a great, healthy way of balancing out all the hard work you're doing and fighting the good fight with the policymakers and the polluters and all that, to have this other end of it that's about discovery and learning with kids and unfiltered joy. That's wonderful.
You know, it's funny you say that, because right now we've all got loved ones or people we know or friends of friends who have just been devastated by Hurricane Helene, and it's hard to watch. It's inspiring to see how much community support is happening, but man, it is heart-wrenching. And so we have this staff of passionate people, which means that they're also passionate. They've got big hearts, and it's hard to watch. We're in climate crisis right now, and we didn't think it was going to happen this soon, but we're in it now. So having outlets that we can still experience this recharge and this joy of, oh yeah, this is why we're here. This is why we're doing this work. We love this river. Look at this amazing place that we're working every day to fight for and protect. It is essential.
There's the Haw River Festival and Nature for All Diversity Series, Saturdays on the Haw. You have so many things, so many opportunities to connect with people.
We have so many things, and I could sit here on this rock with you and talk that passionately about all of our events, so that we don't have that much time. So I'll just talk a little bit about our Nature for All series, because it's one I'm really proud of. A couple years ago, so I mentioned that I am a river rat and I grew up paddling, and you know, there's a lot of young women in the paddling community, but not nearly as much in this part of the state I had found. A couple years ago, I got this wild idea that I was going to paddle the entire Haw, and I wanted to do it with people who didn't look like me, people that also didn't see themselves in the paddling recreation community. And so I found these other folks that love being outside and paddling and camping, and it was me and Raphael Garden and Juju Holton and Francisco Plaza, and we spent 10 days together paddling down the Haw. And they all got paid what I got paid to spend a week on the river for my salary position. And we camped and we learned and we tried to figure out how we could get more people to have access to this kind of experience. I'm the kind of person that travels for recreation. I go on river trips with my family, with my friends. We travel all over. But you can do that right here. I mean, I did a 10-day river trip on my river, and it was amazing. A lot of log jams. So I don't recommend the very, very upper sections unless you really are ambitious and strong. But it was a beautiful trip, and people don't really see the Haw as like a through paddle adventure like that. And so from that trip, we really started to think about, okay, well, a 10-day paddle trip isn't accessible. That's not really meeting our goal here. So how can we bring diverse communities into these spaces? And I hired Raphael Garden and Juju to teach different workshops. And so Raphael runs an outfitter, Explore Kayak, and he held a workshop to make sure that people had free access to boats and training, just to be confident on a kayak or in a canoe. What does that look like? And since then, it's grown so much. We've had water confidence workshops where we hired someone to just getting people comfortable in the water in Jordan Lake. And we've had birding workshops. We've had nature journaling workshops. We've had food foraging and cooking workshops, all taught by people of color, and really making sure that it's either completely free or a very small fee. And we pay the instructors for their time. And also some of these instructors were brand new. So one of the side benefits that we've really realized is one of our instructors that did the birding workshop, she had never done a formal birding workshop like that. She was just really interested and knowledgeable and passionate about birds. Well, we hired her to do a workshop, and then from that experience, she grew so much of her confidence in that work that she got a certification from Cornell. And now she's a paid birding instructor. And so it's awesome for members of our community that don't necessarily see themselves in the outdoor recreation space, but it's also just been so great for the instructors.
Continuing our thread of working with the community and getting people involved, I was wondering if you wanted to talk a bit about other opportunities like internships, learning how to do the water quality monitoring and muddy water watch and things like that.
Yeah, so we have a lot of citizen science volunteer programs. We are a small organization and we've got a big watershed, and we can't be everywhere all at once. And so we really rely on community members to help us be the watchdogs for our watershed. You're in Greensboro. I go up to Greensboro a lot for work, but I'm not out there every day looking at the color of your stream. So if something is weird, something is off, if your stream is bright orange or smells funny or anything like that, I'm relying on you to let me know. And there's other things that we train folks to do more scientifically. Like we have a river watch program that you have volunteered with, and we train volunteers to go out and collect pH samples, but also look at the macroinvertebrates. So macroinvertebrates are the small insects that are really the basis for a healthy ecosystem, but some are pollution tolerant and some are pollution sensitive. If we're not finding any pollution sensitive macroinvertebrates in a stream, we know there's a problem. And so that's what we're training volunteers to do. And they collect a survey of their stream or their section of the river quarterly, so we can keep track of those changes and report to Department of Environmental Quality when we see red flags.
I participate in the River Watch program that Emily spoke of, and I meet once a quarter with my local River Watch friends at a set location on a local creek where we monitor the water characteristics like clarity or turbidity, pH level, temperature, and general appearance. We then search for the macroinvertebrates that Emily spoke of and log them into different categories based on their sensitivity to polluted water. I'm slowly getting better at identifying the macroinvertebrates, and it's so much fun to look for them under rocks, logs, leaves, and along the banks, and in the small catch nets that we use. They all, of course, get returned to the water after our assessment. We're conducting science, but it also reminds me of playing in and along creeks when I was a kid.
You'll get your favorites too. Like you'll open up your net and you'll be like, I found a dragonfly! And you'll know which ones are your favorites, or like even the different species of a dragonfly. It just takes time.
Speaking of what you find in or along the river, what kinds of other things would we see typically in this area in terms of wildlife and critters? What do you usually encounter?
I see a lot of birds. We have a lot of eagles and osprey, kingfishers, herons. We have green herons here, which are one of my favorite. But the things that I love seeing that I rarely see, not because they're not prevalent, but just because they're shy, are river otters and an American mink. We have American mink here,
wow.
And it's such a treat to get to see them. I remember the first time I saw one, I thought it was somebody's ferret. And I was like, what? It was so cool. They're adorable and very small. And we see otters a lot too. You just have to be out at the right time and have to be very quiet. And if I take my dog, there's no chance that we're going to see any
Definitely
mammals.
not. Definitely not.
Emily is part of a program to place what are called trash traps into area creeks and rivers, and I asked her to tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, so we have a trash trap program. Right now we've got 7 trash traps in streams all throughout the Haw River watershed. We're about to put in 3 more. I'll just use our Third Fork Creek example one because it's our first and it's also our problem child. Third Fork Creek is a very urban stream in Durham. It drains most of downtown Durham and it's a really urban watershed. A lot of impervious or paved surface. It's a very dense population in that watershed too. And so we put in a litter trap. It's basically a floating chain link fence with pontoons. And it's got booms that come out of the front of it. And so it filters everything as it goes downstream into this trash trap. So it doesn't solve the problem of litter, right? But it captures everything so we can have our volunteers go out monthly and clean it out. But we're not just cleaning out the traps. We're also categorizing every piece of trash that comes out of that trash trap. And I emphasize every piece because do you know how many pieces of styrofoam one cup breaks down into? It's hundreds. And so we can have thousands of individual pieces of styrofoam that our volunteers are counting every time we have a trash trap cleanup. Styrofoam has become the bane of my existence at these litter cleanups. There's just so much, and it's such an easily preventable pollution source. There are other states that have banned it entirely. We have a ban against bans. We have preemption laws that prevent us from having plastic bag bans or styrofoam bans or any kind of thing like that. It doesn't make any sense. So for our litter trap, we bring all of the trash out, we categorize it, and then we can take that information back to the city of Durham or the state government, and we can say, look, if we had these common sense policies to eliminate single-use plastics or plastic bags or styrofoam, we would reduce the litter in this one watershed in 1 year by X pounds. And that's really important data that we can then use for policy and advocacy work. I also have found that litter cleanups, well, first of all, have you ever been to a litter cleanup yourself?
I have. I've been on a few.
It's a pretty powerful thing when you can look at this section of a stream that's just really nasty and trashy and awful, and then you spend a couple hours with your friends in a pair of waders, and then a couple hours later you've got this beautiful creek again. I think that it is kind of a gateway drug to environmentalism.
I think you're right.
And so it's been really fun to watch this program grow and to build partnerships with the local municipalities, stormwater departments, and they want more. We're about to put our third one in Durham, and we're about to put a second one in Greensboro. And so this program is growing not just because there's a need, which of course there is, but because it's such a tangible way that people can have an impact at a time when it feels pretty hopeless sometimes to fight these big looming environmental and climate problems.
Outside of, let's say, organized cleanups, events, things like that, are there ways that people can keep an eye on things? Are there ways that they can do that or that they should do that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pollution reporting tool on our website, and so even if people are just concerned, they drive over their creek and it's bright orange, or it smells funny, or it looks a little bit different today, people can shoot me an email or use the form on our website. So that's one way. But we also have a lot of other ways that people can get involved that isn't necessarily as hands-on, but is a little more accessible to people. And just as important, legislator contact is huge. I go to the legislative building regularly. They already know what I'm going to say before I walk in that room. But if they hear from their constituents, or they get an email, or they get a phone call from a constituent, that makes a huge difference. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a legislator's office and I've told them the issue, I've told them why it's important that they vote this way or that way, and their response is, well, I'm not hearing from any of my constituents on this. I can't retort that. If I'm not their constituent and I'm just representing my community, my Haw River watershed community, but they haven't heard from anyone that they represent, then that's what we need help on. And it could be as simple as an email. It could be as simple as a phone call. But that makes such a huge difference. And we have specific times, specific issues, specific calls to action that we will always put out on we have a newsletter that goes out digitally every Friday. That's the best way to keep tabs on what we're doing. You can also follow us on social media. We put all of our action alerts and anything like that out on that platform as well. But our Friday newsletters are the best way to really keep tabs on all the things we're doing.
I get all of those. I follow the socials and get your newsletter, and there would be things I would not know about at all if it wasn't for that newsletter. So thank you. And in addition to ways that people can let you know or reach out or report, are there any other tools or resources that you want people to be aware of?
I think because I'm so inundated in this world that I forget that a lot of folks don't know where their drinking water comes from or where their wastewater goes. That is shocking to me. Yeah, I would love for people to know that. Even if it's like, what watershed do you live in? What's upstream and downstream of you? I think just having an awareness of where you are in your watershed and what your impact or what's impacting you. What's upstream of you? Where's your wastewater going? Where's your drinking water coming from? And if you're on a well, we haven't had the air emission problems that they have closer to the Chemours plant for PFAS, but I am increasingly concerned about those biosolids fields and landfills. If you're on a private well, just knowing what's around you that could be impacting your groundwater.
I like to ask my guests, what's the big issue they're working on right now? What's the tough nut they're trying to crack, or the wicked problem they're trying to solve?
Right now, I am incredibly worried about I have a community in Graham. They have contaminated drinking water from sludge fields. And when I say contaminated, I mean that their finished drinking water coming out of their tap exceeded 3,000 parts per trillion for total PFAS. And the EPA has said that any higher than 0.002 for one of these compounds is too high. In addition, that specific community member is also a firefighter, so he's exposed through his turnout gear, the firefighting foam, so many ways. And North Carolina doesn't have a system in place to protect private well owners. So we have fortunately been able to work with NC State. We got a personal check from one of the scientists that I work with to buy under the sink reverse osmosis systems for all 6 of these families. NC State also helped us buy blood sampling kits for the entire family, so kids, husbands, wives, grandparents, everybody living in these houses. That's what keeps me up at night. We found that on a fluke. I mean, I looked at maps and I saw that there was a house that was right on top of the fence of a sludge field. And on the other side of the road was a pre-regulatory or unlined landfill. And I was like, this can't be good. I knocked on the door, took a sample, and that's the result that I got. And so we found that just out of dumb luck. And so I'm incredibly concerned about those communities who still don't have a long-term solution for their drinking water. They have these under-the-sink filters for now, but it's not a long-term solution. And I'm really concerned about all the other communities that we just don't know yet. The amount of sampling that would be required to really confidently know who is impacted or who is not impacted by sludge and landfill leachate it's a lot of sampling and a lot of money. And so we're applying for grants, we're trying to meet this need and also have money not just for sampling but for filtration systems and blood tests. If I come to you and I'm like, hey, can I take a sample? And then I deliver this devastating news to you that your water is toxic and your family's not safe, if I don't have a filter or a blood test kit to help you after I've delivered that devastating news, then what good have I done for you? So it's not enough to know. We have to help these people too, and that's what keeps me up at night.
I also like to ask my guests what gives them hope for the future. What's the thing they find inspiring and that motivates them to keep doing the great and fascinating work they're doing?
Right now, I'm really hopeful by the outpouring of support that our Western North Carolina friends and communities and river keepers have seen, not from the state, not from the federal government, not that those resources aren't happening, of course they are, but from individuals, from people who are giving what little money they have to these organizations or donating warm clothes and diapers and formula. And I love seeing people take care of people. And we've really built our careers at Haw River Assembly around that. I mean, we take care of the river and the animals and the ecosystems that depend on it, but it's the people that keep me motivated and also keep me up at night.
Right. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to include in the show.
I guess just a plug for supporting your local riverkeeper group, whether it's us or not. We do the state's job on nonprofit salaries. In North Carolina, the state used to have funding to do sampling and enforce regulations and do all of this work, but the General Assembly controls that budget. And so the people who work at DEQ, they got into that work to do good. And their budget has been tremendously slashed systemically over decades. And so they rely on organizations like us to do the sampling and translate what that sample means to an impacted community member. And if we find a pollution source and we report it to DEQ, they may not have the capacity to actually enforce it. So that means that we're also working with legal teams to uphold the Clean Water Act outside of the North Carolina regulatory structure. That's a lot of work. on a little bit of money. So there are some amazing riverkeeper programs, not just in North Carolina, but all over the U.S. and all over the world. Figure out who they are and support them, because whether it's your money or your time, we need your help.
Emily, thank you so much for taking a lot of your generous time. You clearly have a lot going on and a lot on your plate, so I really appreciate you being on the show and telling us about what you do and giving us lots of inspiration and tools and knowledge that people can go and explore and find ways to get involved and figure out how to connect with their water.
Absolutely.
So,
I loved any excuse to get to my favorite spot on the Haw. So thanks for getting me out of the office today.
Oh, and thank you to Ola. Ola has been very busy. She's settled down next to us now. She's like, yeah, there's a lot of questions here. I think I might be done for the day.
She's been fact checking us.
That's right. She's fact checking.
Thanks so much to Emily for taking time to meet with me here on the beautiful Haw River. That's a wrap for our show today. I appreciate you giving the Roving Nature Podcast a listen, and I hope you'll share it with others who might be interested. All episodes are available on www.rovingnature.net, where you'll also find a blog, social media links, and nature-related news and resources. Stay tuned for more episodes to come, and in the meantime, I encourage you all to get out in nature when and where you can, even if it's only a few minutes a day and just outside your door. Learn about and get involved with your local nature and conservation organizations and help support local and national legislation that will help protect our precious natural resources. I'd like to give a huge shout out to local singer-songwriter Abigail Dowd for letting me use her lovely song Beautiful Day as the theme music on today's show. You'll find links to Abigail's artist and album websites and her Instagram on this episode page and on the Roving Nature website.
Beautiful day outside.